Hey everyone, I'm Jay Bell from Panda Game Manufacturing, and today I'm in the gumbo pot. That's right, our good friends at Board Game Gumbo allowed me to use their studio to film our video today. We're about to take a look at a game that has had major growth in a very small amount of time. It's a natural beauty with tons to explore, so fill your canteen with water, grab your favorite mix of snacks, and join me as we go on a hike behind the board. Hey Matt, thank you for joining us today so that we can talk about parks and trails. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Jay. How are you?
I'm really good. So before we kind of jump into all of the behind the board secret tips and advice, tell me about your relationship with Panda and how that first started. What games were you working on at that time?
Sure. So we at Keymaster have only ever manufactured a game with Panda from the very beginning. The story of our relationship goes back to Kyle and Maddox, my two business partners, in their first attempt to make a game, Control, which was a game we put out on Kickstarter. It was just a card game. We had quoted a couple of US-based manufacturers and Panda, likely because of our fandom of Stonemaier games and the kind things Jamie says about you guys all the time. So we went and checked out, hey, here's Control. Here's this game we want to do. We want to put gold foil on it. We want to, put it in this embossed box. You want to have a tray. And we just rapidly realized that we weren't going to be able to do that in the U.S. easily for our first game. And so there you go. The relationship blossomed from there. And since then we've published, I think we're coming up on our 12th base game with Panda, and a whole bunch of other supplemental products from there.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. 12 games, like as a designer myself, getting to 12 games is a dream number, right? I'm just getting started with 1 and 2 games, but
there you go.
That's really awesome.
Next up is the baker's dozen. We need a baker's dozen.
So at what point do you feel like you really got the hang of the whole manufacturing gist? Was it around game 3, game 5, game 7? Are you still learning?
I've talked earlier about my two business partners, Maddox and Kyle. They started the business. I was helping them out on the side with spreadsheets and fulfillment stuff. And so when they brought me on board in 2018, they were in the process of doing 2 games at once. They were working on Space Park, which was our third published game, and then Caper, the first edition of Caper, which was a localized game that we'd brought over from Portugal. And they were working on both of those games. They were trying to design their own games, illustrate games, and do manufacturing all at once. It's each game we kind of tried to enter into something new and try to figure out something new. With Control, it was a small box and metal coins. Then it was Campy. We were trying to figure out wood and how we could, should we do screen printing or heat transfer or just machine cut, laser cut. Then with Space Park, we went into 3D models. We have little rockets that go in our in Space Park, and we were like, okay, hey, how do we do this well? And then with Caper, it was kind of taking all that knowledge and putting it into a small box. And so by then, I think that they had an idea of what made a Keymaster game, right? Ivory core, linen finish cards, 2 millimeter chipboard boxes, and all chipboard components, being that 2 millimeter wrapped. We were kind of figuring out who we are. And then they brought me on and they had to retrain me on all of those things. So about game 4.5, it's our second edition of Campy Creatures, I started learning the soup, if you will, trying to figure out how we do it and how we work together. And all of that culminated in January 2019, the Kickstarter for Parks. And I think at that point, we took kind of this 4 or 5 games worth of knowledge. And it was like, okay, hey, how do we make something that's truly special that matches up with the art that we were working with from 59 Parks?
As you were talking about how you tried all these new things slowly with smaller boxes and different components, I really like that. I never really considered how publishers would do that during manufacturing, but I know a lot of times designers are told, if you're going to crowdfund, start small. Don't do anything too crazy. But I see how that can translate into manufacturing because you don't want to try too much too soon and sort of have too many plates spinning at the same time. So understanding and using that technique sounds really, really smart.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think back to the history, we were on Kickstarter 2017, 2018, 2019, kind of in the heyday, right? The slope of growth. They were different days on Kickstarter, if you will. And so we had received that advice and we took it to heart. Hey, learn one thing at a time, start small. That's why the Control was just a 52 card game at the beginning. The Kickstarter did so well. We were like, okay, stretch goals. Let's add some metal coins. Let's make the box a little bit bigger. Same thing with Campy Creatures. But ultimately, again, I think that all of that was just a groundwork of trying things and figuring things out. I think there's, we made a second edition of Control. We made a second edition of Campy Creatures within the first 4 years of the company existing because we had learned a lot. And we were like, oh, hey, we want to apply these new learnings to our, to the games that we know and that we're known for at the time.
So you mentioned that you all went into this sort of culmination of all your learnings with the PARKS Kickstarter. Tell me more about PARKS because this game blew up really fast.
Yeah, you're telling me. So again, I joined in May 2018. And we sat down. I remember early on we said, "Hey, what's next for Keymaster? We've got Space Park coming out. We've got Caper coming out. Those are going to be, Space Park was kickstarted. Caper was our first direct to retail title, and we were like, okay, hey, we don't know what we don't know about these games yet. We don't know if the direct to retail model is going to work. We don't know if there's going to be a bigger swell of people interested in Space Park after. What should we do? Let's go to this Campy Creatures second edition." We sat down, we decided to do that. And as we were working on that and getting closer to the project, going live on Kickstarter, Maddox, our creative director, got a reach out from 59 Parks. It's a print series based out of Austin, Texas, worked with 40 plus, at that time, 40 plus amazing artists. It's grown since then. And they were like, hey, we love your work. Campy Creatures is a great game. And we love your work. Let's make a game together. Right? So it started with this mutual admiration between us as creatives and this print series. And it started as a card game. And again, it goes back to our learnings, right? Oh, hey, what do we know? Well, we know card games. Let's check out a card game. We started making this card game and putting these cards on tarot-sized cards. And we're like, oh, this is fun, but are we there yet? At that time, we were working with Henry Audubon, who had designed Space Park for us. And we were like, hey, we've got this idea for a game. You're hiking, you're exploring the national parks. Okay, cool. There were some other great games in the genre at the time. Not as many as there are now, but there were just a couple other national park outdoor themed games. And we were looking for inspiration there. Couldn't really find it. Okay, hey, well, what do we look for inspiration in a nature game? Let's look for it in nature. Hiking with people. Okay, so now we've got 2 hikers. All right, we're going to add some wood. Okay, well, what do? Oh, you're going to collect these resources. Okay, let's make those wood bits. Okay, what are some other cool things that we've never done before? Well, we've never worked with enamel. Okay, cool, let's make an enamel first player token. Right, it's all these things started building over the fall and winter of 2018 until the Kickstarter. At the time, we knew it was a fun game. It was a game that we wanted to play. I think we make that kind of next steps game that could be played by a new gamer or just a casual gamer, someone who wants to have a game for game night. We were like, okay, this is a really fun game. Let's see how it goes. And like you said, it vastly exceeded our expectations. The Kickstarter went really well. I remember talking with Kickstarter and BackerKit at the time. We had a ridiculously high day 3 through 20, right? Normally you have a big spike day 1, day 2, and then a big lull, and then big spike again at the end. And we had a medium spike day 1 and 2, and then just kind of leveled off and just kept growing. And it was because people either loved the art, they loved the national parks and didn't really care about the art of the game, or they were like, oh, this game looks really fun. Some of our fans showed up, right? Our Control and Campy and Space Park backers. And we kind of culminated in this game. It goes really well in Kickstarter. And we're going, oh, okay, well, we've got to deliver. But at the same time, you're sitting here going, well, what does that look like? We've had great games on Kickstarter. We had our early games had some success in retail, but this is something bigger. So what do we need to do? And that's when we reached out to Noah at Game Trays and started working on, hey, we want to put a box organizer in this game. So at that point, we had one tray, a plastic tray that we used in Control, but it was not, it was more of a standard tray. I put that in air quotes because they're still very functional, but there's a whole different level of trays. Okay, so let's upgrade our tray game. We made this, Noah said, hey, yeah, I can work on it. We're like, okay, how quickly? And he's like, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And the next day, Noah sends us a rendering of the resource tray that's in Parks, which is shaped like a log and whose lid has log texture on the top and says Parks and Game Trays on there. And we're like, oh man, this is awesome. And slowly, just kind of one component at a time, one mechanic at a time, we go from this card game to this, hey, we've got this trail, we've got these hikers, we've got all these wood bits. You've got all of the Parks cards on tarot-sized cards. You've got the mini deck of cards, and it just came together and fit in this box so tightly, perfectly packaged. And it was, the rest was history. It was a rocket ship after that.
That's so awesome. So there's a ton I want to break down there, but kind of first off, you mentioned that this was fall/winter of 2018, right? And we're in summer of 2023, not even a whole 5 years later, and Parks is on its what printing now?
We're on 14th. I'm about to send over the contract for a 14th printing. We've printed in English over 200,000 copies, which is just a mind-boggling number. And then you throw in all the international partnerships. We're approaching 300,000 pretty quickly.
Not even 5 years and 14 printings. What is that like to sort of take that in as a publisher doing manufacturing? I know there's multiple languages of Parks. There's print run after print run after print run. Tell me about your experience with that.
Yeah, I think, we 2019, none of us are full-time. We don't have an employee. This is still just this is a side gig, a side hobby. And I remember sitting down at Gamma, which is a big trade show in Reno, with Barnes & Noble at 1 a.m. in the morning and playing with it. And they're like, oh, we love it. We'd love to bring this in. And we're like, oh, okay. So, hey, can we get, hey, Panda, can we get another 5,000 units? Can we figure this out? Throw it in. We just kind of crashed everything in for fall of 19, holiday of 19, right? We had about 30,000 copies coming. We made a huge bet. I remember talking about it with my partners and saying, hey, let's take every dime we can scrape together and let's print as much as we can. And we did. We printed as much as we can, and that fall we sold out, right? Now, over fall holiday, we were already working on our second printing. We didn't have any money to print, prior to getting that first big check. After it hit retail, we'd put everything into it. And so the moment we got that first check, we were prepared for a second print run, but we needed to make some changes. First, we had gone to Essen that year, and a couple of international partners, specifically Fuhrland and Madigo, were like, hey, we want to get this in German and French. And we were all starstruck, and like all things, we probably thought too highly of ourselves than we ought. I mean, let's be honest. We were like, we had all this success. Oh, this is awesome. This is great. And so we were like, oh man, the spiel. I wonder if Parks could make a spiel. We got to get it in German. And part of that was hey, listen, every single component in this game is not language independent, right? All the trail tiles had, the lookout, the outpost. It's like all these names on the chipboard pieces. Okay, well that means the entire chipboard piece, not language independent. We're gonna have to translate it or do a plate change over. Okay, cool. Let's figure out where we can go language independent with this game. And so we did that. That was the second print run. We had to get rid of a bunch of the English words that were on components that didn't need them. And we made that switch. And it was successful and it was good. And there was some confusion, I think, early on, spring of 20, people were like, oh, wait, what is the Lookout? Well, we don't have it titled anymore. All right, we got to rewrite the rule book. We did that. At that time, holiday of 19 and Q1 of 2020, we put out our second print run. We'd ordered as much as we could. Again, same thing, just kind of taking it all in. We're going all in on Parks. And we did a second print run, and then we had gone to Kickstarter with Nightfall, its first expansion, and Parks Memories, which is a memory matching game with the Parks art. And we were thinking, oh, this is going to be great. This is okay. We're printing the second print run. We're going to catch up with retail. We're going to be out of stock, but that's okay. We didn't know. And then we'll get this third print run in with the Kickstarter. Well, needless to say, some things happened in 2020.
You were talking about all of your language partners and stuff, and you mentioned a few of the challenges, like having to rewrite the rule book, having to make some of the components language independent. Let's talk about some of those benefits, on the other hand, of having additional languages and doing those together with your print runs.
Yeah, so I think there's been a ton of challenges. Again, you talked about learning, and we talked about every print run, every game, we're learning something new. So this first foray into localization. Really, there was some awesome benefits. First of all, we were able to lower our unit costs by coordinating print runs. Hey, Germany, you guys want in here? Okay, we're gonna have a French copy as well. Well, that means that collectively we're printing a lot more games, and we're able to get a lower unit cost, which was awesome. I'm still trying to get back to my fall 2019 unit cost. There's some things happen in 2020. Namely a pandemic that changed the landscape. But at the time we were like, oh, this is awesome. We're going to be able to print more frequently at smaller quantity in English at a good unit cost because we were coordinating. Second, it's additional marketing, right? It's like, oh, hey, we're a U.S. publisher. Oh, about 75%, I think. I think it's 65 to 75% of our sales are in the U.S. It's an important market for us, but there are people overseas that we love that speak English and want to play our games. Having those other languages in those markets where they're just so much smarter and have more access to be able to market and talk about their games was a huge boon. Especially, Parks, we had a good Kickstarter, we had a great Q4 launch, but still, most people have never heard of Parks. It's just like using our friends from Stonemaier again. People go, what's Wingspan? We're all sitting here going like, oh, Wingspan. It's like the biggest, it's the biggest game, code names level of awesome. Oh yeah, that's right. There's still people who didn't know it. So having other people come along and talk about it tripled our bandwidth for talking about, hey, there's this game that exists called Parks that you should play. So it was a huge boon for us. Not to mention the fact that an international partner is going to pay you a royalty or profit. It's pretty, I call it risk-free as it relates to increasing your cash flow. So as a publisher, right, I've got someone who's like, I want X number of copies. Cool, we've negotiated a royalty rate on top of that. And that's just going to come in without me having to put cash down in order to get it back. It's just pure money on top, which is a huge deal to kind of jumpstart growth if you're bootstrapping, which is just putting money back into the business over and over again.
Yeah. See, these are the things that we want to share with people who may not have as much experience as you and your team do, just to help them understand what manufacturing is like.
Yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned your relationship with David, your project manager, just a little bit. Tell us more about that whole journey of knowing David and all of the assistance that he's able to provide to you.
We originally were assigned a product manager named Matt Sims, who's no longer with Panda. Great project manager, loved working with him, and he worked on those first 4 projects I mentioned through Caper. And then, I'm coming on board at the same time that we're transitioning over to David. So David and I kind of had our Keymaster stories start at the same time. So those first 6 months, which was Campy Creatures 2nd Edition, Control 2nd Edition, and the Campy Creatures expansion, we're learning about each other. Okay, how do we work? How do we communicate well? Growing. And then we both kind of have this, okay, Parks is going to be this big thing. We need to we need to level up. And he was right there with me, right? One of the components that we really loved to work on were all the wood bits. And specifically, we wanted that stained look. Normally, up to that point, we had painted all of our wood, and we were like, hey, how do we use stained wood? We want to do like a stained red and a stained green and a stained brown. How do we do this? And David's going, okay, hey, well, what do you want it to look like? How do you want it, what do you want it to be? So we sent a copy of Agricola. If you've ever played Agricola's got great wood bits. Hey, David, this is what we want. Okay, let me see what I can do. And so David is an extension of my team. He is a team member just as much as anyone else. I'm calling him, I'm saying, hey, here's my problem. Or I'm calling here, I'm saying, hey, what do you think about this solution? And we're going back and forth. He's communicating with the rest of the Panda team. Hey, does anybody else done this on a project? Hey, what do we know about this? What are the pitfalls we need to avoid? And that was one of them. We figured out the staining process. And again, I think the wood bits in Parks are some of the most beloved things in the game, apart from the art. That's just one of many stories, specifically on Parks, where he came through. He's like, oh yeah, we can do this. Here's how we're going to do it. And it's evolved over the 14 print runs as we continued to figure out that staining process more and more and more effectively.
Yeah, awesome. And not only on our side are you getting a project manager and a pre-press specialist, Keymaster is growing as well. You mentioned that you joined the company. You weren't there from the beginning. What has it been like to grow the company even more, and how has that affected how you've been able to manufacture? As
you grow as a publisher, I think Keymaster has made a ton of mistakes, right? Whether it's we back in that Parks print run, that very first one that I said that we printed 30,000, we thought, oh, you know what? Parks, Space Park, they're adjacent, same designer, really adjacent art style. Man, we should make a big bet on Space Park. So we printed a bunch of Space Park. This is, again, summer of 2018. I'm about to sell my last copy of Space Park from that print run from 2018. It's just one of those things of, okay, hey, do we know what we need? Have we learned what we need to learn in order to be successful? Have we learned inventory management? Have we learned cash flow management? Have we learned to make better forecasts as it relates to, hey, these titles are adjacent, or hey, our placement in big box retail or hobby is going to support one another? That kind of learning doesn't happen unless you evaluate your experience. We have a saying that I didn't come up with, but I use. It's that wisdom comes from evaluated experience, not experience, right? If you do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again every year, the same mistake, you haven't grown in wisdom. You haven't learned anything because you haven't evaluated it. So at the growing part of Keymaster is the opportunity to have space to evaluate. I think probably from the Nightfall Kickstarter in February of 20 through the first year and a half of the pandemic, we were trying to catch up on inventory, learn how to do Target. We got the Target was placed on shelves in the summer, August of 2020. Whoa, wow. Okay, we got delays on the manufacturing side, really more on the transportation side. We've got cash flow pressures because all of a sudden they want a bunch of inventory. We're still trying to do the Kickstarter. Oh, we need another expansion, so we got to design and develop that. We're learning this memory matching game. It was overwhelming. So from 2020 probably until summer of 21, we were just going without the proper bandwidth to evaluate how are we doing. Hey, we made projections, but I come from a corporate background. I come from a place we do FP&A, financial planning and analysis. I'm used to sitting down once a quarter, once a month maybe, and going, okay, this is what we said was going to happen. Did it happen? We didn't start doing that really well until, call it the spring of 2022. And so that whole time, we're just going, and we think, we talked about, hey, we learned things from print runs and then we applied it in future print runs. That didn't translate over into operations. One of our biggest growing pains was we were evaluating success on the creative side. We weren't evaluating success on the operations, logistics, and finance sides.
So Matt, you mentioned it sort of. You teased it a bit, the retail and the Target integration. Tell us more about exactly what you mean, because we're talking about another game here today too. It's called Trails, and apparently it has a nice story linked to parks.
Sure. Yeah. So I think again we're in this realm of evaluated experience. December 2019. It's our first quarter selling parks in retail. It's in Barnes and Noble. It sold really, really well in Barnes and Noble, beyond our expectations. They were like, we need more, and we're like, okay, cool, let's print. And at the same time, Target we worked through a consolidator, a third-party sales consultant. That's probably what, more layman's terms. I outsource our sales function to the big box retailers and to distributors through a company called PSI, who've been awesome to work with, and they've been a huge asset to our team. PSI had said, hey, Target, why don't you check out this game Parks? National parks are on the rise. It's going to be a more expensive game in your category, but I think you should really check it out. And they had come to us and said, no way, it needs to be $40 or you need to make a bigger box. We talked a little bit about the box. It's an 8.5 by 8.5 by 2.5 inch box, and it is packed, right? There's not a fraction of space in there. We've got the insert for everything's got a spot, and the resource trays all lock in. And so that was important to us not to change the size of the box. And, we set the price at the time at $50 or $49 with a very direct-to-consumer heavy market, right? We thought we were selling it on Kickstarter, and maybe we'd have a website and do Amazon, and those are higher margin places to do business. So they had said $40 bigger box. We said no. And then February of 2020, we get a letter. Oh, we're so excited to bring Parks onto shelves. We need this, we need 13,000 copies by May 15th. What? Are you serious? One, we're celebrating. Two, we're like, okay, and how do we do this? So we scramble to get it on shelves. August 20, we make it. We have copies at Gen Con. It launches at Target. We're getting ready to fulfill the Nightfall Kickstarter. Things are going really well. And we think to ourselves, well, hey, do we want to make another bet on Target? We think this is going to be a really great space for us, but there was so much hesitation about the game being $50. At the time, the only other $50 games on the shelves were Ticket to Ride Europe and Catan. Those are the only two $50 games that I can remember on Target shelves at the time. And we were like, okay, man, if this doesn't work, what do we want to do? Well, we knew that Target played really well in the $20 and under space. It's one of their best places. You can see Exploding Kittens just at that time explode at Target. Now you can see it. They've got an entire shelf, right? They've got a line that they're doing at Target. And so we go, okay, hey, what would it look like to make a $20 version of Parks? And we had some art from 59 Parks that were not national parks. They were the Continental Trail, Appalachian Trail, Continental Divide Trail, Appalachian Trail. And we were like, oh, hey, Cape Cod. There were some things that were like, this isn't going to go in parks. What if we pitched a $20 game to Target? And so in September of 20, really late August, early September of 2020, we said, hey, Target, we've got a box. It's Exploding Kitten size. Here's what it looks like, and it's called Trails, a Parks game. We're trying to, we pitched them this idea. We're trying to expand the Parks line, and we think that you're the right people to do this. And they bit. Unfortunately, we didn't have a game done. We had about 4 designs during that time that we'd been working on, and ultimately, we made it through the first line review, and we're sitting there in November, right before Thanksgiving. I remember sitting down with Maddox, our creative director, and Henry, saying, "Hey, Henry, we've tried to develop this game Trails internally. It's just not quite there. We think it's going to be on a Target shelf. If not, we want something that's, mass market enough, but also will be great in the, for the BGG, average BGG user. What can we do? By the way, you have a month." Henry delivered. He designs this awesome game about hiking. It's familiar to Parks. We talk about it as Parks' little sibling. We finally get the game done, illustrated. designed and developed by mid-January, and we hit print. Still haven't heard from Target. We made another bet, right? We were like, okay, hey, we've caught up on inventory with Parks. The entire industry in Q1 21, we were all behind on inventory. We were all trying to figure out how to get stuff to the US. And so we took all of our money and we said, okay, hey, we're going to at least get 20,000 copies of Parks or Trails ready for the market. If Target takes it, awesome, we're ready. If not, we just hope that we can do a good launch strategy and support it. Needless to say, they ended up taking it. For them, they were like, oh, this sounds great. We'll have a $50 entry point to the brand and a $20 entry point to the brand. And it worked. We sold, I think close to 80,000 units that first 12 months from when Target launched it through, that would be August of 21, through summer of 22. It was a huge success for us. It was at the $20 price point, a more profitable game for us because we built it for a retail audience from a pricing perspective. And it was awesome. It's been really fun to watch those two games kind of grow alongside one another.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of how you look at wisdom as evaluated experience. And some of the points you've talked about have really sounded like risk and betting on yourself, but truly, it's more like educated betting, right? Not wild and zany. It really does sound like it's coming from the experience that you've had and what you know about your audience as a company. And I think that's really important.
I think that's really interesting that you say that. I think there's a concept called resulting, which is after you see the result, you evaluate whether it was a good decision or not. And you're really basing your evaluation of that decision on the result. So here we're sitting here talking about Trails and Parks, our two most successful titles. But I can point to 7 or 8 projects where we made what we thought was a great decision and the result didn't turn out as expected. And so stepping back, sure, absolutely, I think trying to make a run for Target was a good decision. And I think we executed on that decision really well. But I wonder still sometimes if there was another version where our energy is put into another a re-implementation of Parks. People always are talking about Parks Canada or Parks of the World, Parks through time, the historic parks, whatever, Parks of the ancient world, something like that. That could have also been a decision. That was a decision that we were, facing at the time. And so, yeah, some of the times the bets work out. Other times the bets don't work, right? Just like any poker player would tell you, you go in with aces and you lose. It doesn't matter if that decision might have been correct, but the results don't always turn out. So we're talking about good results, but there are plenty of questionable decisions and bad results that we could probably wax poetic about for hours.
So we're talking about Trails as sort of a younger sibling to Parks. And when I played it, it did feel like this game is different. This game is different, but you can see the clear relation. What was it like to manufacture that? Did the limitations feel bad, or was it nice to sort of have those guides and understanding what you already needed for the game?
Yeah, I think there are different, let's say designing and developing, and by designing and developing, I mean all the way to the consumer. A game, designing and developing a game feels like you're on a highway and there's on-ramps and off-ramps, okay? There are times when you're early in your design process where limitations are good guides. Like, hey, make sure you're always at least headed north. It doesn't matter if you're northeast or northwest, but you're headed north. And then I think there's a point where you go, okay, we understand a little bit more about what it is we're trying to create, who we're trying to create it for, how it's going to fit in the market. Maybe you understand a little bit more about the price you're trying to hit, the price point you're trying to hit for the customer, or hey, we want to include, we think these components are going to be the turn or the hook of this game. And you start to put some more solid ground guardrails in. For trails, what was really interesting is that the guardrails existed from the very beginning. We told Target in August of 2020, we have a $20 game that comes in the same size as the Exploding Kittens box, and it's going to be called Trails. So we put these guardrails on, and they were not guardrails, they were walls, right? We could have made a change. I'm not sure Target would have put it on shelves if we made a change. You kind of want to, once you get them interested, once you get them, hey, this is what we're looking at, you kind of want to just leave it alone. You don't want to draw, oh, we're making a change. People don't like change. So for those guardrails, it was very clear. We had $20. We knew what we had to fit. We had to fit everything in a box. We knew what the game was called, and we even knew what the cover illustration was going to be. And we wanted to call it a Parks game. That was probably our biggest conversation internally, is what is a Parks game? Is this something that we're doing? We had done Parks Memories before, which is a memory matching game that used the same art. It had a hiker that's kind of moving around your available tiles that you're trying to match, blocking spaces. Okay, cool. There's some things that feel familiar to Parks. So how does that translate over to Trails? Same thing. We said, hey, well, we want hikers. At one point, it was like a Race for the Galaxy style, where on your turn, you moved the hiker to one of the 5 spaces, and it was everybody took an action, and the player who moved the hiker got to take a bonus action, right? Race for the Galaxy style, that I choose, you follow. So there was some familiarity there. Oh, okay, well, let's include gear. So we tried gear for a while because that was, again, something from Parks. And I think while our limitations were great from designing perspective, that $20, the box size, we didn't have good limitations or guide rails on what is a Parks game. That ultimately was solved when we brought Henry on to help us finish the project, and he nailed it. He's like, oh, we're going to hike down a trail. We're going to go, in this case, back and forth. Instead of setting out a new trail, you're going back and forth, back and forth. We're not visiting parks, we're earning badges. A throwback to Space Park. Instead of 2 hikers, we'll just put 1 hiker in there. Again, we're trying to hit this $20 price point, and we'll make the tension of when you're moving just due to 1 or 2 spaces. You want it to be familiar to Parks? We'll put a canteen in there. You can move as far as you want. So I think that was good from a design perspective. Then from a manufacturing perspective, it was actually pretty straightforward. We're going to have chipboard trail tiles. They'd have to fit in this box. How big can we make it to fit the box and it feel like a good table presence? Oh, well, that was a pretty easy solve for the creative team. Then it was, okay, we need to add cards. Well, cards in this box size that we had meant that we had a limited number of cards that we could include. Oh, we want to include wood bits. That was one of probably the hardest decision we made, is including the wood cubes in Trails instead of, in Parks, we had the nice machine cut forest, mountain, water, sun, and wildlife. And so we had to make the decision, not only for a space consideration, but also for a cost consideration. We had to get it into a profitable place for us. So yeah, there was a ton. Guardrails are super helpful, especially in designing something like Trails.
Throughout your time, Matt, manufacturing Parks, Trails, and every other Keymaster game, tell me about a time that was interesting where you had to figure out something that didn't quite go as planned, or an innovative sort of hurdle that you worked around.
The one that sticks out, again, this is in the 2020 era, trying to get stuff onto Target shelves, was the staining process. It's something that we had figured out in the first print run, and we executed on really well. But as we ordered more and more games and got into that 3rd, 4th, 5th print run, we discovered that the staining process that existed at Panda had some limitations, both from a throughput perspective, how quickly you guys can do it and efficiently, and then also if there was any sort of rush, you're going to have some quality control issues. And so we love Panda. One of the things we always talk about is, you guys know how to cut on center, right? The margin for error is so tight for you guys, and you deliver on it consistently. And so in the third print run, everything was working great, except I started getting these notes. Hey, my wood tokens are moldy, which is not mold. It was just that the staining process, if not properly dried, or if they applied too much stain to some tokens, created some globbing, I would call it, or some spotting on the tokens. If you imagine like a puddle of paint drying on one half of a piece of wood, like if you're trying to stain something, that amount of stain on that part of the token is going to be different than another part, and you're going to be like, oh, this looks bad. Hey, David, what's going on? Again, I come from a financial and an audit background, so I was like, I need an action plan. Tell me about, hey, what happened and what you guys are going to do about it. And that was, again, during COVID. So in the middle of probably the biggest backup of manufacturing games back in 2020, everybody was trying to order games, and it was taking longer because of we're trying to figure out how to manufacture during COVID, which you guys did a great job of, by the way. We're trying to figure that out, and we're trying to figure out, hey, we've got to get this staining process to a more predictable, repeatable outcome. And y'all delivered. I mean, it was by the next print run, you had invested in a new machine. We had gone through multiple rounds of sampling, making sure that, hey, we're going to have a high level of quality control that's enabled here. And y'all delivered by printing extra tokens. And so with our next Kickstarter, we were able to fulfill to anybody that needed replacement tokens, higher quality, or not defective wood tokens. And so I think that was a moment where I was just saying, hey, I've got a problem. And David goes, that is a problem. We're going to fix it, and did it, beyond our expectations.
Nice. I was not around for that print run or that situation, but I imagine it was probably great in quotation marks.
It was one of the many 2020 challenges. You talk about evaluated experience. Whew! As looking back, there was a lot of experience to evaluate back in 2020, 2021.
When you talk about new learnings, the first one that comes to mind for me actually is the one that we dealt with recently with the FSC certifications. And FSC makes sense for pretty much every game in your line, I think, at least the ones that I've worked on. And tell me a little bit about your experience there with the FSC certifications.
FSC has always kind of been on our radar. I remember early on talking to David, hey, what do we know about the paper that we're sourcing and the wood that we're sourcing? And there was a belief, okay, it's high quality, it's sustainable, we're sourcing from reliable sources. And it's like, okay, cool. That was good enough for the early days. And I think there was a moment last year where we were like, why aren't we just going full FSC certified? And at the same time, Stonemaier was also doing this. And so, thank you to Jamie and team. They took the first pass at this with y'all. And it's a part of a pattern of Panda where a publisher learns something or pushes you all to learn something. You do it well, and then there's a bunch of followers. And so in this aspect, we were a first follower, right? We were like, okay, hey, this FSC process, it's time to go. We've got a bunch of print runs right now that just arrived in the United States that are FSC certified. And that process was really, hey, David, this is important to us. I think we want to pursue this. What will it take? He laid out to us what it would take. He called up, I think, Shannon, who was working with Stonemaier, and said, hey, what do we have to do? What are we gonna learn about? And we entered into that. Now, we entered into it as a first follower, right? A kind of a second person to come along. And we had some questions. FSC is a huge organization, and they have, here's how we do it. Here's our brand guide online. So we went to their brand guide online and went through the process of putting the logos on our games and sending them over to you, Jay, sending them to you for pre-press, right? And you're going through and going, I'm not sure this meets our standards, or I'm not sure it's going to get approved. And we're going, I think it will be. Look, we went to the brand guide. And so there was some negotiating back and forth of, hey, do we want to try to push this through and let them reject it? Or do we want to try to get it right the first time? I feel like Keymaster, we're always in this spot. Again, it's like, if you haven't heard a theme here, we make a bet, we see the result, and then we make another bet. And so we're often, it feels like, under the gun, always trying to figure out how much should we print, how quickly can we print it, waiting to the last minute. Not a strategy that I would recommend, but it's the strategy that we could afford. And so we said, hey, like, let's do it. Why don't you guys submit these files, these FSC files, using the brand standards that we've implemented, again, our understanding of FSC. And you guys were like, okay, that sounds good. If it gets rejected, we'll try again. And most of them didn't get rejected. Most of them passed the test, but we had to learn something new. Chicken, our most recent product, that's a dice game that we're releasing this summer. It's a small box, and the space that we had to put the FSC logo on was very, very limited. And so we thought we had read the guide properly and put a small, kind of a sub logo onto the box, and they rejected it. They said, hey, this doesn't follow our standards. And the fact is that that's about all the communication we got. It wasn't big enough, didn't follow and it's like, okay, hey, we got to go. And so we made the decision for that most recent print run. Okay, hey, it's going to be FSC materials. It's going to be certified. We just are not going to put it on the product. And that's just kind of the trade-offs that you make throughout the process of going, do I have time to fix this? Do I have time to make this right? Or, hey, do we need to just move forward and try again on the next print run? Which is something that we have the luxury of doing, saying that we know we're going to get a second print run and a third print run of Chicken. We know we're going to get a 10th, 11th, 12th print run of Parks. So it was a fun process figuring out FSC. We've got everything that we're using in the games now are FSC certified going forward. But it was just another thing we had to learn, and it's another couple of weeks of trying to figure out and rearranging files, putting new logos on there. We got there now. We figured it out.
Sweet. Matt, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective there on the FSC certifications and what that journey has been like. And that's really what I love about working on your projects, is that you all are so willing to just work with us and be a part of the learning and being open to learning these new processes with us together. And like you mentioned, we understand the FSC certification so much better now because we got to try it out.
Yeah, I think that's again, when we talk about Panda, we talk about a partner. When I talk about David, our project manager, I'm talking about a team member. I've got many publishing friends who, for their strategy, they want to go quote 7 manufacturers, and they want to find that right balance of quality and price. And they spend a lot of time in that process, and then stuff goes wrong. Not always. Most of the time it doesn't. But when something goes wrong, it's an extra challenge. It's extra time. And you've heard me say time is our most valuable resource that we feel like we don't have enough of at Keymaster. Whether that's because we want to design more games, hey, we know we're slow. Or we want to, figure out a new sales and marketing strategy, or we want to evaluate how successful we were on launching puzzles, for example. I got them right there. There's constantly trying to figure out something new. So to have a partner, to have someone in your corner who's going to say, hey, this was a mistake and we want to work to fix it, or hey, just FYI, when you submit this FSC logo, it might get rejected because it doesn't align with the way we did it before. Or hey, yeah, that we can figure out how to do staining. Just give us some time. That conversation takes trust. It takes investment on your side, investment on our side. And it takes risk, right? It takes a willingness to make a bet. And so the partnership is a huge boon to me. We have trained other people along the way to figure out how we do manufacturing. I've had to hand it off and take it back a couple of times as responsibility shift on the team. But the fact that you guys are an anchor for us as it relates to manufacturing, your knowledge is available to me. Your evaluated experience is available to me, is a huge boon. and something that, again, I'd highly recommend. Find a partner, stick with them, grow the relationship, build the trust, and hopefully great things come from that.
Awesome. Now, you've kind of touched on it throughout our entire conversation here, but I remember when we spoke pre-recording, you mentioned this kind of phrase that has been sticking with me of like, what does winning look like? So my question for you is, what does winning look like when it comes to manufacturing?
I think the winning, again, it comes back out of that evaluated experience. When you set, hey, we're going to do something. Hey, we're going to manufacture a new game. And we're going to bring a deluxe edition of that game to market. Well, what do we mean by deluxe? What does our customer think deluxe is? Are they comparing it to Parks? Are they comparing it to a game from CMON? Or are they comparing it to a game from All Play? Great publishers. And we don't always know. And so what we do before every project, we say, hey, what do we want to be true about this game? When we sat down to do Chicken, what do we want to be true about this game? Well, we want it to be fast-paced. We want it to be a bright and colorful and inviting on the table. We want a board in the middle because, like we can play Rook with a score pad that's just a piece of paper and a pen that the grandma hands us. But it would be really cool if you could watch your pieces move around the board. And so when we're talking about what does winning look like, we're not talking about sales, although we do measure that and we do set targets for that. We're not talking about profitability, although we do measure that and we do set targets for that. What we're talking about is what is the experience that we want for the players around the table. And oftentimes that is almost fully in the hands of the manufacturer. If I want to make a dice game that has custom dice, well, I need to find a manufacturer that's going to execute on our vision for what these dice should look like and feel like, making sure the colors are just right. If Chicken is a great example, there's some bright colors, yellow, reddish orange, white. They're all kind of smashed together. And okay, hey, we need this red from this ink to match the red of this dice. Send someone to the dice factory and make sure that they match perfectly, right? That's kind of our heart, is to make sure that from a color perspective, from a component perspective, that everything aligns with our vision for what the player around the table is going to experience. Whether that's someone who's got a 500 game collection or someone who just picked this up randomly on a Friday night at Target to play that night. And in order to execute that, you need a manufacturer who understands your vision, understands you when you get something wrong, or when there's miscommunication. Y'all need to translate. You need to be able to translate what I'm saying and bring it to reality. And so that a manufacturing partner is critical to accomplishing that winning, that success that you want to see. And not just, again, we talked about resulting earlier. A manufacturer, you don't evaluate by the result. You evaluate by all the decisions and the information you had along the way. And then the result should speak to that good decision in selecting a partner.
Awesome. Matt, I really appreciate all of the insight and all of the behind the scenes stories you've told me today. Thank you so much for bringing us behind the board with Parks and Trails.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for being a partner of Keymaster, and I'm looking forward to the next decade of making games with y'all.